Welcome to another episode of How to Be Your Possible Self. In the last podcast episode, we looked at the first 7 steps to effective goal setting. Here, we look at the second set of steps, where our major goal starts to take shape, and we get into the nitty-gritty of making sure we will achieve it. Goal setting number 8. Deadline. Goals should always have a deadline. Without a deadline, there's no imperative to actually finish the task. Goals that have no deadline belong to gunners. Gonna do this, gonna do that. Gunners are the mediocrity of society. You don't want to be mediocre. You want and deserve to be one of life's winners. So set yourself a deadline for achieving your goal. Even though you write your goal down in the present tense, you need to have a deadline for achieving your goal. It doesn't matter if that deadline is 1 month, 1 year, or 1 decade away from now. Just give it a deadline. Deadlines give us a sense of urgency and emotional motivation to get the job done. Goals should also always be specific, measurable, and quantifiable. Otherwise, how will you know how near or far you are to accomplishing it? Having a specific, measurable, quantifiable, and time-constrained goal gives us a big edge. Goal setting 9. Obstacles. Identify the obstacles that currently stand in the way of you reaching your major goal. What are they? Who or what is causing them? What can you do to overcome them? In addition, identify as much as possible what future obstacles you may come up against. Not all of them will eventuate, and you will no doubt meet obstacles that attack you out of the blue. But identifying and preparing to overcome them really does help give you the inner confidence and sense of peace to face up to the challenges that life always throws in our path. Goal setting number 10. Knowledge. It is highly unlikely that you can just start towards your goal. It is highly unlikely that you can just start towards your major goal today and not have to learn something along the way to achieving it. That extra knowledge you need could be anything. For example, how to read a company's financial statements, how to market yourself and your services more effectively, how to communicate with colleagues and loved ones more effectively, how to paint a wall or strip a wooden floor. But without that knowledge, and there may be many new things you need to learn, you will take so much longer to reach your goal, if you ever do reach it. So set out on paper what extra knowledge you will need, what facts and figures, what skills and techniques, what tips and tricks will help you to get to your goal. Goal setting 11. Others. We don't live in an isolated world, no matter how lonely we may feel sometimes. We are members of an interdependent society, and we all need someone else every day. It could be needing clients or a boss to pay our wages, a garbo to take our rubbish away, a milk vendor to sell us milk, a bus or train driver to take us into the city for work. Similarly, we all need others to help us meet our goals. Clients, friends, partners, family, bosses, colleagues, mentors, and guides. We don't necessarily have to meet these people, especially in the case of guides and mentors. They could be people we read about or whose books or courses we buy. But we all need someone else, often several someones, to help us meet our goal. First off, identify who these people or groups are. Whose assistance or cooperation will you need? Secondly, determine what their needs are. What can you give them for them to help you? Remember, the fastest way to get a friend is to be one first. The fastest way to get a smile is to give a smile. The fastest way to get a punch in the mouth is to give a punch in the mouth. The fastest way to get someone to help you is for you to help them first. Goal setting 12. Plan. This is a fundamental part of effective goal setting. If you learn nothing else from this podcast, please learn this. If you do not plan, you are planning to fail. Let's explore the importance of writing your goals down and writing them out in full. we're going to use the example of one of the wonders of the modern world, compound interest. Let's say that as of January 2020, we have a bank balance of a mere 1 cent, but that we are fortunate to secure from our gullible bank manager an interest rate of 50%. That is, each month the previous month's balance grows by 50%. Thus, at the start, January 2020, we have 1 cent. Next month, our balance has grown to 1.5 cents. In March 2020, our account balance is 2.25 cents, and so on. A year from starting, in January 2021, our account balance is now just below $1.30. By January 2022, it has reached the giddy heights of $168.34. By January 2023, it is mere cents below $21,842. Yet, had we taken the money out now, it would have been a terrible waste of future opportunity, a terrible waste of our time. By August 2023, that money would have grown to a staggering $373,185. So, would we take it out now? Probably. That's what 90% of us do. But what if we left all the money in our account for just another 5 months? By leaving it in until January 2024, our money would have grown to a staggering $2,833,873.33, nearly $3 million. Can you see how important the last 5 months, or the last 10%, really whacks our money into the stratosphere? That highlights the importance of commitment in our PCA profile and of holding on for that last 10%, of going the extra mile and doing the job properly. So many times when I meet people who say they are goal setters, they tell me they do have goals. When I ask them if they've written them down, only a few say that they have, about 4% of the population. When I then ask those who have written their goals down, only a handful, less than 1% of the population, have not only written their goals down, but have spelled out on paper how they're going to achieve their goals, what steps they need to take, and what milestones they can use along the way to measure their performance. Curiously, which percentage of the overall population of any Western nation achieves huge wealth? Less than 1%. How many of the overall population of any Western nation writes their goals down on paper with the clear, specific steps that they need to take to achieve these goals? Less than 1%. If it's so important to not only write our goals down but also spell out how we are going to achieve them, why don't more people do it? Because of fear, because of not achieving the goals and feeling inadequate, or fear of actually achieving them and losing our friends, especially in tall poppy countries like Australia, New Zealand and Britain. There's another fear too, teratophobia, fear of giving birth to a monster. I named one of my music albums this. The title was suggested to me by a record label executive as a tongue-in-cheek reflection of the chances of me making them any money. We've heard so many stories of ogreish, brutish, insensitive, callous, cruel-hearted, mean-spirited, greedy robber barons that we are very often scared that we'll turn out to be just like them if we achieve great wealth. I would argue that such a fear is just an old wives' tale, a myth which has no real basis in reality. Sure, there are always going to be mean-spirited and greedy people around. But great wealth doesn't make them like that. They've always been like that. Money only brings to the surface their underlying nature. If you are greedy, insensitive and callous before you have money, then money only allows you to be more greedy, insensitive and callous. If you are generous, kind, supportive and compassionate before you have money, then money allows you to be even kinder, more supportive and more compassionate. Money just allows us to give expression to the most prominent facets of our nature. Money just allows us to be who we really are more often. But often when we're setting our goals, we don't get to the planning phase. How are we going to achieve these goals? Because we get distracted. The lawn needs mowing, or the kids need us to get something from the fridge, or we need to make that telephone call, or finish off that spreadsheet. As athletes and writers say, we hit a wall and our mind pushes our attention elsewhere. Henriette Ann Clouser says in her excellent book Writing on Both Sides of the Brain that most people have fabulous excuses for not actually going the last 10%, in her case writing, ranging from get more paper, hope the phone rings, clean out the refrigerator, arrange papers on the desk, feed the gerbil, and sharpen my pencil. Even famous American writer Fran Lebowitz claims to be her own worst enemy. As she says, when I'm supposed to be writing, I clean my apartment, take my clothes to the laundry, get organised, make lists, do the dishes. I would never do a dish unless I had to write. But the way to get over and around the excuses, argues Henriette, is to look at the cause of the procrastination, not the symptoms. Sure, short-term motivational techniques can help, but only in the short term. You'll soon find other ways to procrastinate once you stop feeding the gerbil. For every reason we find to put off doing the job properly, there is a cause. There is a meaning behind us putting off doing what we know we should, and our job is to find out what is causing the blockage and unblock it. We can do this by sitting quietly and listening to ourselves. Really listening, not interrupting ourselves or trying to justify ourselves or argue against ourselves. Just sitting quietly and listening to what our quiet voice within is trying to tell us about why we are putting off doing that little bit extra that'll make all the difference. Or else, try asking yourself, last thing at night, why you keep pulling up short from giving it your best shot. Keep a moleskin pad and a blackwing pencil next to your bed, and when you wake up in the morning, write down the first things that come into your head. Don't censor what you write, just write. Because your inner critic hasn't woken yet, you'll amaze yourself at what and how much you write, especially as these thoughts are more likely to be coming from the quiet voice within, without the harsh inner critic censoring your true feelings. It's vital that we write our goals down on paper and clearly spell out how we are going to achieve them. Once we see how we are going to reach them, they become believable and attainable. We can then find the emotional energy to commit to them, commit to making them come true. Without a clear, prioritised and time-lined plan, you are making things harder for yourself. Please take the time to plan out your strategy for achieving your goal. Goal 13. Persistence. Persist and persist and persist and persist. Keep on keeping on. Your persistence is your measure of the faith you have in yourself, in your ability to achieve your goal. You will always come up against obstacles in life. We all do. It's part of our existence, and not even the extremely lazy or timid go through life without coming up against obstacles. Obstacles are there to challenge us, to help us grow, to point out to us what we need to learn, what new skills we need to acquire. Obstacles are fabulous feedback mechanisms and proof that we are on the right track. If it's too easy, it's no fun, and it probably means that we haven't set a big enough goal to stretch us properly. Remember, like an athlete, we need to stretch if we are to grow as human beings. Muscles don't grow while working out. Fitness experts now recognise that muscles actually grow in the post-stretch relaxation phase. We need to stretch first and then let ourselves relax for true growth to occur. Welcome obstacles into your life as tools to help you reach your goal. Welcome failure as a way of teaching yourself important lessons. Look at failure not as a sign of your incompetence, but as useful corrective feedback. When we were young, did we learn to ride a bike on the first try? No, we had to fall off and skin our knees several times before we finally learnt the lessons we needed to learn to control and then master our bike. Did we learn to drive instantly? No, we had to learn valuable lessons to be able to control the car and then keep on learning more valuable lessons for us to develop mastery of our vehicle and driving behaviour. I remember seeing Oprah Winfrey once talking about her grandmother and some of her sayings. One that particularly resonated with me at the time, and apologies to Oprah if I got it slightly wrong, but I think it went, "You did the best you could with what you knew. When you knew better, you did better." Welcome failure not as a sign of inadequacy, but as a useful feedback for more learning. When looking at something you've tried that hasn't worked out the way you wanted, remember what Ted Nicholas, a famous direct marketer and self-made multi-millionaire, says. Next. When something doesn't work, learn from it what you can and move on to the next trial. If a particular advert doesn't work as well as he would like, he didn't beat himself up about it. He just examined what might have caused the failure, learnt what he could from it, and moved on to the next ad. Next. Do you think Walt Disney, of the worldwide phenomenon Disneyland, was a man who was easily discouraged? How many times do you think he went to his local banks to try and raise funds for the madcap, wacky, zany scheme of his to open an amusement park where all the rides were free? In America at the time, all amusement parks charged individually for the rides. It was the accepted practice and how things were done around here. Walt wanted to change that. He wanted to create a magical fairy tale place full of themes and very expensive construction. The cost to build was phenomenal, and he went off to the banks in search of considerable funds to build his goal. You and I have probably gone to the bank at some stage to ask for a loan. How many times do you think we tried to raise a loan if the first bank laughed and said no? Once? Twice more perhaps? Even 3 times to really push our luck, to get a second opinion on our plan. How many banks do you think Walt went to? 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15? How many of us would have given up after 15 banks said no? How many of us would give up after 15 banks had said no? How many of us would even bother to see 15 banks, but give up completely despondent after 2 or 3? Did Walt give up after 15? No. Did he give up after 20? No. 30, 40, 80, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300? No. After 302 banks said no, he finally found one that said yes. And do you think they got their money back? Oh, yes. Walt saw that getting finance for his dream was going to be difficult. It was a huge obstacle, but he never gave up on his dream. He persisted and persisted and persisted and persisted until he found someone else smart enough to realize that his dream was a winner. There was once a laundry worker in America who earned a tiny $60 a week, but who dreamt of being a writer. He spent his nights and weekends typing manuscripts to send to publishers and agents. Each one was rejected, with a form letter that meant that his work had probably not even been read. He kept at his writing, despite the years of receiving nothing in the mail but rejection letters and bills. Eventually, he and his wife had to disconnect the phone to pay for medicine for their baby. In a moment of despair, he threw the latest work he was writing into the bin. Thankfully, his wife, believing in him, rescued it without telling him and sent it off to a publisher. Carrie went on to sell over 5 million copies. The writer was Stephen King. What if he'd given up after the first few rejection slips? On that theme, and hopefully inspiring some of you who may have writing as part of your goals, here's some other famous rejection slips and some fabulously awful reviews received by famous writers. I'm sorry, Mr. Kipling, but you just don't know how to use the English language. That's the San Francisco Examiner's rejection letter to Rudyard Kipling in 1889. It's impossible to sell animal stories in the USA. A rejection comment on George Orwell's Animal Farm. I can foresee no commercial possibilities for such a book and consequently can offer no encouragement. That was a publisher to Lawrence J. Peter on his manuscript The Peter Principle, Why Things Always Go Wrong. The book was eventually picked up by another publisher and sold more than 200,000 copies in its first year, and was on the New York Times bestseller list throughout 1970. Neither long enough for a serial nor short enough for a single story. That was to Arthur Conan Doyle on his work A Study in Scarlet. And finally, my personal favourite concerning my favourite author. You're welcome to Le Carré. He hasn't got any future. One publisher's views regarding John Le Carré's manuscript entitled The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. Now, are you going to give up at the first hurdle? Goal setting 14. Time management. Managing our time is a key component of effective goal achievement. We can either choose to fritter our time away and meander along the path to our major goal, or we can be more focused and disciplined, resulting in getting there faster. There's a well-known law in business life that applies to much else of life too. Pareto's 80-20 law. That is, 80% of your profits come from just 20% of your clients. Or, to apply it into other spheres of life, 80% of your feeling of warmth and friendship will come from just 20% of your friends. Or, in the case of goal achievement, 80% of your achievements will come from just 20% of your work. It's just identifying which 20% of your clients or your work is the chunk that will produce the 80% that's a bit tricky. Making the most effective use of your time is a sure bet way of finding that magic 20%. There's another little bit of wisdom that has also passed into management folklore, that the best way of achieving many things is to focus all your attention on just one thing and move on to the next thing only when the first is fully completed. Here's how to make that folklore work. Draw up a list of things you need to do today, this week, this month, and this year. Start with the list for today. Prioritize all the tasks by putting a number next to them. You can make number 1 the highest if you like, but it doesn't matter as long as you know what your rating system means. Then focus all your energies on completing that top priority. When it's completed, and only when it's completed, move on to your second priority. All day, while you're working, if you find your mind drifting off, bring yourself back to your task by asking, is this the most effective use of my time right now? If it is, then keep working at it. If it isn't, then you're obviously working on the wrong thing and revisit your priority list. Always ask yourself during the task at hand and when contemplating how you will achieve a task, am I working smart or just hard? Sometimes we find surprising answers to that question. So that's the 14 steps. But before we leave them and discuss other issues, let's just take a moment to discuss the vital issue of feedback. Feedback is essential in life. We need feedback to survive as infants, to know if we are doing the right things to get milk from our mother. As children, we need feedback to know we are doing the right things to get approval from our parents. Are we doing the right things to ride a bike, kick a football, play a game, dress ourselves? As adolescents, we need feedback to know we are heading down a dangerous path. Are we doing the right things to drive a car? Are we studying the right subjects for our abilities and interests? We also need feedback as adults. We need feedback to know if we are a good lover, a good parent, a good partner, a good employee, a good employer, a good friend, and so on. The list of areas in our life that we need feedback is just about infinite. We need feedback if we are to know whether we are on the right track for achieving our goals or we are heading down a wrong turn. But to whom do we turn to for this feedback? Well, naturally we get a lot of feedback from ourselves. Our intuition is a tremendously powerful tool, if only we take the time to listen to it. Similarly, we can elicit feedback from events and effects. Whenever we try something, be it new or well rehearsed, we get feedback. Either we have done it correctly and got the result we expected, or we get a result different from our expectations and therefore have an opportunity to learn and grow from it. We can also elicit feedback from our friends, partners and others. But be very wary of who you ask for feedback, because the person you ask needs to be qualified to give you a valid answer. Imagine that you have a tricky tax question. Would you be wise to ask your next door neighbour if they're not a tax accountant? Would you be wise to ask your unemployed brother-in-law about investment strategies if he is neither an investor himself or has any experience in investing? So why do so many people ask the advice of people who have no idea what they're talking about? For many years I listened to the well-meaning advice of people close to me, family, friends and others, on subjects and issues that they had only peripheral, if any, knowledge. That's not to say that they didn't have my best interests at heart, only that they weren't qualified to give me the answers I sought for some of my questions. Their views were coloured by both their prejudices and by common mythology. But when you're looking for critical feedback in order to make a challenge, not criticism, but constructive praise and warning, then you need to be sure that the person you're looking for that feedback are qualified to give you the guidance you seek. I wouldn't ask someone earning less than the minimum wage how to be a millionaire, because if they knew, they'd already be it or on their way to it. So please make sure you get advice and feedback only from those who know what they're talking about and who also want to help you achieve your goal. A competitor is hardly likely to stop you wandering off down the wrong path if it means that by correcting they'll lose the race or some key business to you, would they? What you ideally want, and should make great efforts to find, is someone who will give you honest, non-critical feedback. Nothing less will do. One of my favourite quotes is from Brené Brown. If you're not in the arena also getting your ass kicked, I'm not interested in your feedback. Well, that's this episode of How to Be Your Possible Self wrapped up. As I said earlier, it's the most important episode of this series. Next episode, I'll talk about self-dialogue and the concept of responsibility. If something you've heard on this podcast stirs something within you and you'd like to leave a comment, why not make it an audio comment? Record a short comment and email it to me at lee@leehopkins.com. Please add a subject of Possible Self Podcast so that it stands out in my inbox. I receive around 60 emails a day, so if you don't add a subject to your email, it may get lost in the morass. You can subscribe to this podcast in Apple Podcasts, and I strongly suggest you do. That way you won't miss any episode. Until the next episode, write your goals down in all their glory and timeline, find the right people to ask an opinion of, and I look forward to perhaps hearing from you soon. Ciao.